Good day, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome. Mary Beth, I love that. I'm wondering if the original audience was as confused as I am. Well, I'm going to join you in some confusion today, maybe. Anyway, welcome. We are studying through Zechariah today. Just a quick reminder that on Saturday for our partners, we have our Zoom meeting. You should have received an email with the link. And if you would like to join us, you can sign up today to be a partner for Cross to Crown. And you can join us for that gathering as we talk about Zechariah and anything else you want to talk about. We usually go for an hour and a half, 2 hours. And it's always a very encouraging and insightful time as we share together. So we'd love to have you if you're not with us. And if you are a partner, looking forward to being there with you on Saturday. So, I put in the thumbnail, is Zechariah the key to dating Revelation? And I think it is. When we get to our study of Revelation, we will see, I don't know if I'll spend much time on it, but I'll just make sure that we understand there is a significant disagreement about the dating of Revelation. If it was written after 70 AD, that will impact, in fact, in many ways, drive your interpretation. If it was written before 70 AD, that will drive your interpretation. I'm persuaded, based on internal evidence, that it was written before 70 AD. I'm convinced that Revelation takes much of what we're seeing in Zechariah, draws from the imagery, in some cases quotes it and applies it, or very nearly quotes it, but then expands it. And here's why I don't like isms. I don't like systems of theology. Don't call me a preterist. Don't put me in the preterist camp. Because preterism and its interpretation of Revelation, I believe, misses a significant element of what is here in Zechariah and in Revelation. There's more going on in Revelation than the 70 AD fulfillment. Now, I don't think it's what the futurists say. I don't think it's the tribulation in our day, anything like that. It's a first century context and emphasis and unveiling, but it's not only focused on Jews in 70 AD. So if that's if you hear, people want to put me in the preterist camp, and you may be from that camp, and you start reading all the writings of men on preterism, I think you're going to create a filter that is going to mislead you. So with that, we're not in Revelation, we're in Zechariah. Does that mean? But, well, let me say this. So the next couple chapters, the rest of Zechariah. Remember how I've talked about the Emmanuel paradigm? If you haven't been with us, in Isaiah 7, it says, "The virgin will be with child, and his name shall be Emmanuel." Jesus is the fulfillment of that prophecy, that prediction. I don't know if you saw the guy who took issue with my word prediction. I don't think he understands how language works. But anyway, that prophecy was fulfilled literally, in part. The Virgin Mary gave birth to Jesus, but his name is not Emmanuel. His name is Jesus. And that's what I mean by the directional paradigm. Sometimes these prophecies are fulfilled literally. Often there is what I'm calling a directional truth. And I stole that term from Scott Adams, the Dilbert guy, who had used it in a completely different context, but it captures the idea well, I think. the direction, the where it points, generally, we begin to see how it's fulfilled. Well, we're going to see that through the rest of Zechariah, and it's going to cause more confusion. Not just Mary Beth, but all of us are going to be confused. So we have to start thinking in terms of what's the broader direction this is heading. And you'll see in today's text especially, there is confusion lurking. So we have to look at the direction this is going. All right, well, with all that as preview, let's take a look. Let's back up a little bit to the beginning of the chapter just to catch the context and review where we were yesterday. Zechariah says, an issue of the Lord's word regarding Israel. All right, one more qualifying or preliminary statement. I see a lot of people coming on and saying, asking what version I'm using of the Bible. That means you guys are new to us. Great, glad to have you. You really need to go back and watch the Haggai series. It's just a few lessons, and then all of Zechariah to get here. And I explain why I'm using the Septuagint and what version of the Septuagint I'm using back in the first, I think it was the first in the series of Haggai. So just wanted to warn you, if you're jumping in midway here, you've missed a lot of context, and I explained all that earlier. So I'd encourage you to go back and watch Haggai and then the Zechariah all the way through. All right, an issue of the Lord's word regarding Israel. The Lord, as he stretches out heaven and founds earth and forms the human spirit within, says, behold, I set Jerusalem as shaking doorways for all the peoples round about, and in Judea there will be a siege against Jerusalem. All right, so that's important. As I reminded you yesterday, these people, many of them, had been alive during the siege of Jerusalem in 586. Now they're rebuilding the city and the temple, and God is saying it's all going to happen again. There will be a siege against Jerusalem, and in fact, Jerusalem will be these trembling doors or doorways for the peoples round about. The peoples are going to flock to Jerusalem. The peoples of Judea and the surrounding areas are going to flock to Jerusalem, and they're going to be under siege. They're going to be surrounded by armies and starved out and killed and so on. And it shall be on that day, I will make Jerusalem a trampled stone for all the nations. Okay, so the peoples around Jerusalem are going to flock to Jerusalem, but then the nations are going to come and they're going to trample Jerusalem like a stone. Everyone who tramples it when mocking shall mock, and all the nations of the earth shall be gathered against it. So the nations here would be the non-Jewish peoples, and they're going to come against Jerusalem. On that day, says the Lord Almighty, I will strike every horse with alarm and its rider with derangement. So the horse and riders for Jerusalem are going to be in chaos. And at the end of the verse here, and all the horses of the peoples I will strike with blindness. Again, imagine trying to fight back as the nations come against you, and your horses are blind, and the horses and riders are in chaos and derangement and madness and so on. There's no chance to win, right? Then he throws this little parenthetical statement here in the middle of this verse. But on the house of Judah, I will open my eyes. So Jerusalem's getting trampled, but the house of Judah will be protected, or at least that's the implication. The Lord's going to open his eyes on them. And the officers of the thousands in Judah shall say in their hearts, we shall find for ourselves the inhabitants of Jerusalem in the Lord Almighty, their God. So the officers of the armies that are coming against Jerusalem in Judah, they are going to search out and find the dwellers of Jerusalem in or by, I think I meant yesterday, it could be by, like the Lord Almighty, their God, is going to be giving them the path forward to the inhabitants of Jerusalem. On that day, I will make the officers of thousands of Judah like a firebrand in wood and like a torch of fire in stubble. In other words, these officers are going to wield great destruction. They shall devour all the peoples round about to the right and to the left, and Jerusalem shall again dwell by itself. It's going to be desolate, isolated, destroyed. Okay, so that's all that we covered yesterday. Now things get very confusing. And this is where we have to start looking for directional truth. By the way, as I mentioned yesterday and I alluded to in Luke 21, I'm persuaded the siege of Jerusalem that Zechariah is talking about is the 66 to 70 AD period, culminating in the fall of Jerusalem in 70 AD. I think that's what Zechariah is foreseeing. Okay, verse 7. And the Lord will save the tents of Judah as from the beginning. Okay, so in the verses I just read to you, in the middle of all the chaos and destruction of Jerusalem, it says, the Lord opens his eyes to the house of Judah. And now we are told the Lord will save the tents of Judah as from the beginning. That raises the question for me, the beginning of what? Well, it doesn't say, but in the context, it would seem like the beginning of the assault on Jerusalem, kind of tying back to the open his eyes to the house of Jerusalem. So throughout this whole siege, it appears to me, I'm not entirely sure this is what it means. I'm not sure what the beginning refers to, but it may be that he's saying he's going to save the tents of Judah just as from the beginning of this. That's the easy part of this verse. That, so that. Okay, Oink, don't go there. Don't go there, bro. Don't try to fill in all the. Let's just make sure that we get the sense here. So that the boast of the house of David and the elation of the inhabitants of Jerusalem might not be exalted over Judah. So the Lord is going to preserve or save the tents of Judah for this reason. Because if he doesn't, then the house of David, the dynasty of David, the household kind of idea, will boast over Judah. What does that mean? The Lord doesn't want the descendants of David to be able to boast over Judah, and the elation of the inhabitants of Jerusalem might not be exalted over Judah. So, in the midst of all this, the Lord's going to save the tents of Judah. He doesn't want the house of David or the inhabitants of Jerusalem who are being sieged and destroyed. He doesn't want them to boast over Judah. Yes, David did come from the line of Judah. Is he going to preserve the kingship of Judah? Maybe. The house of David. But I don't know. I mean, this is just confusing. Directionally, the thing that I guess is clearest is that he doesn't want that Judah to be squashed by the house of David and the inhabitants of Jerusalem. I guess the clearest thing I could say is it's a further statement that those of the house of Judah, the tents of Judah, are going to be saved by the Lord. Dale says the beginning of the 12 tribes as a nation. Don't know what that means. All right, now it gets even more confusing. And it shall be on that day, the Lord will be a shield for the inhabitants of Jerusalem. And the weak one among them in that day will be like David. And the house of David will be like, literally, a house of God. The house of David will be like a temple, or a dynasty, I guess, like an angel of the Lord before them. All right, well, I'm going to try to practice what I preach here and not try to make an allegory out of this. And I don't know what all this applies to, but there has been a shift here for the inhabitants of Jerusalem and the house of David, it seems. Certainly the inhabitants of Jerusalem. In the first part of this chapter, the inhabitants of Jerusalem were under siege and being crushed, and their horses and riders were chaos and so on. But now God is going to be a shield for them. So some of the inhabitants of Jerusalem are going to be destroyed. Some of them are going to be shielded. And some of the house of David are going to be tempted to boast over Judah. And some of the house of David will be like the house of God, like an angel of the Lord before the inhabitants of Jerusalem. Okay, do you see that? Do you see how there's been a shift here? Some of the inhabitants of Jerusalem are besieged. Some of them are shielded. Some of the house of David want to boast over Judah. Some are going to be like the house of God, like an angel of the Lord. Do you see that much? Without going further in this, do you see that is the implication of what's going on here? Yeah, Oink says, that's weird. Wasn't God going to let Jerusalem be destroyed? Now do you see? You see the point? Give me a thumbs up if you're seeing that. Or a yes, or some affirmation. It's the same phrase, the inhabitants of Jerusalem. Back here, earlier, okay, everybody's seeing it. Excellent, excellent, excellent. All right, I think that's what we're to take away from this. We're going to see more of the same through the rest of Zechariah. Jim says, I sort of see it. Daniel's all confused. It is confusing if you try to interpret it literally, and especially if you try to draw a straight line from any of these concepts to what you think you know from the New Testament. That's why I'm warning you not to do that. As we just look here, there's the imagery of the siege against Jerusalem. Clear as mud, yes. There's the siege against Jerusalem. There's the chaos. There's the nations coming against them. And then God shields the inhabitants. And the hard part is he doesn't say it. But there will be some in Jerusalem for which I will be a shield. We just have to keep pondering it until we see that here. At least that's what I think is true. And again, we'll see more of this as we go. And it shall be on that day, I will seek to destroy all the nations that come against Jerusalem. So maybe that makes it clearer that there has been a switch. Right? Jerusalem is being sieged by the nations. But now God is going to turn against those nations that have come against Jerusalem. I believe there is a switch here in who the Jerusalem is. Well, maybe that's introducing a little more than I want to yet. Well, probably you know what it means. And I will pour out a spirit of grace and compassion on the house of David and on the inhabitants of Jerusalem. Right, oink. He said he would break the staff that bound Jerusalem and Judah earlier. So this is what the New Testament unfolds for us. There is, all right, I'll just spell it out, and maybe this will help as you go back and think through this. Am I going to do that now? Nope, not going to do it yet. Sorry. All right, so he's going to pour out his spirit of grace and compassion on the house of David and on the inhabitants of Jerusalem. And they shall look to me because they have danced triumphantly. And they shall mourn for him with a mourning as for a loved one. And they shall be pained with pain as for a firstborn. So Jerusalem's going to be besieged. They're going to be tempted to arrogance and boast over Judah, whom God said he would save. But God is also going to be a shield for Jerusalem, and the house of David is going to become like a house of God, like an angel. And God's going to turn against the nations that came against Jerusalem, and he's going to pour out his spirit of grace and compassion on the house of David and on the inhabitants of Jerusalem. And they, the inhabitants of Jerusalem and the house of David, they will look to me because they have danced triumphantly. And they shall mourn. This triumphant dancing is that boasting, I think, the arrogance. They thought they had great victory when in fact they didn't. They had victory over Judah and they didn't. And they're going to mourn for him. Who's the him? We don't know. With a mourning as for a loved one, and they shall be pained with pain as for a firstborn. So isn't this interesting? God's going to pour out a spirit of grace and compassion, and they're going to look to the Lord because they dance triumphantly. But then they're going to stop dancing and they're going to mourn and be pained as though they had lost their firstborn son. So this triumphant dancing is a false elation. Does that give us some insight into back in verse 7? I will save the tents of Judah as from the beginning, so that the boast of the house of David and the elation of the inhabitants of Jerusalem might not be exalted over Judah. The house of David and the inhabitants of Jerusalem are exalting over Judah. They are prideful over Judah because look who we are. We're Jerusalem. We're the house of David. And yet God protected the house of Judah. And turned out their boasting was not good. But the Lord will be a shield for Jerusalem, and there will be the inhabitants of Jerusalem and the house of David that will become like God's house. And God will turn against the nations that came against Jerusalem. He will pour out his spirit of grace and compassion on David and the inhabitants. They're going to look, they dance triumphantly, but then they realize, oh, we should not have been dancing triumphantly. And they mourn as for a loved one. There's something that has happened that causes them to grieve over this one. They were dancing in triumph, and now they're grieving like they lost a loved one, and they have this pain as though they lost their firstborn son. On that day, the mourning in Jerusalem, for you listening, that's M-O-U-R, mourn. The weeping, the wailing, the mourning in Jerusalem will be great, like the mourning for a pomegranate orchard cut down in the plain. So if you think of pomegranates as a sign of God's blessing and fruitfulness and joy and celebration and good food and harvest and all of that. And you have this, huge field full of pomegranates, and all of that is wiped out and destroyed. There'll be great mourning because of the devastation, destruction, poverty kind of thing. And the land shall mourn, tribes by tribes. The tribe of the house of David by itself, and their wives by themselves. The tribe of the house of Nathan by itself, and their wives by themselves. The tribe of the house of Levi by itself, and their wives by themselves. The tribe of Simeon by itself, and their wives by themselves. And all the tribes that are left, a tribe by itself, and their wives by themselves. So there's destruction coming and besiegement for Jerusalem. There's arrogance that turns to mourning. And all the tribes are going to weep and wail as what they thought was prosperity, what they thought was a firstborn son, what they thought was a loving family, are all being destroyed. And tribe by tribe, individually, they are going to be weeping and mourning and realizing how wrong they were. All right. Yes, some of you are jumping ahead. Yep. Do you see that? Are you tracking? Just stay here in Zechariah for a moment. Do you see the point? This again, the directional elements here. The nations are coming against Jerusalem, and all the surrounding peoples are going to flock to Jerusalem and be destroyed. God's going to preserve Judah. And the inhabitants of Jerusalem and the house of David are going to be tempted to exalt themselves over Judah, to boast over Judah. But it turns out Judah is the one that the Lord spares. But then there's a transition so that the house of David and the inhabitants of Jerusalem are also shielded. Obviously not all of them. And they're going to boast, and then their boasting is going to turn to mourning and weeping as though they lost their firstborn. Do you see? Some of the inhabitants of Jerusalem are going to be destroyed. Others who thought they were living in God's blessing and prosperity are going to be driven to weeping and mourning because of the devastation. Do you see it? David's telling himself, stay in context, Do you see it? That's the point. That's the imagery that we see here. And again, we're going to see it in the upcoming chapters as well. Well, because I keep trying to read these passages in Zechariah as chronological, which is throwing me off. Yeah, that's a good insight. Good insight. We have to keep coming back and saying, what's the directional? What's the overall message here? What's the imagery suggest? All right. Before I take you to Revelation, is everybody? You may not agree with me, and that's fine. But can you at least see the case that I'm making here just in Zechariah? I saw a couple things. Let me see. Dale says, back in chapter 8, you said Jerusalem was possibly the church. Are we seeing the same here? Okay, great question. And I don't remember exactly what I said back there, but if I said that without any qualification, I was a little too broad. Well, it depends on the. Okay. For the rest of Zechariah here and in Revelation, we have to keep our focus on the first century. You know how I'm always warning you against systematic theology and abstracting and extrapolating? The things we're going to, so yes, I believe the church is in view here, but that's not quite right. It's the church of the first century who are converted from Judaism. Keep it. This is still talking about the Jews in the first century. In chapter 12, I don't think I see anything here that goes outside of the Jews. Does that help answer that question? Jim says it was a 4-year period. A lot happened. Is that the 66 to 70 you're talking about? Daniel has Pentecost coming to mind. Okay. Is this about God determining who is righteous and not in Israel and otherwise, his protection of those who are righteous? Yes. In the first century, Jews. This is those viewing Christ on the cross, I think. Hold on. Sounds like the first chapter of... Yeah, we'll go there in a moment. So the temple to them was their firstborn son, while it should have been Jesus. I can see why you would ask that question. Not sure that's the point, maybe. Why would it isolate the wives? Great question. I don't know for sure, other than just showing that there was a significant individual and collective weeping. Otherwise, I'm not entirely sure. Okay, everybody's seeing it, tracking. Great point about first is 8 or 9. Didn't you say this is us? Yeah, so William David Buck, did I clarify that? That's why I have to be careful to not just throw out Jerusalem as the church. The context for all of this is first century, and the emphasis is on the Judah, Jerusalem, house of David part of the church, not Gentile part of the church. Is that clear? Okay. So let me show you something else. This is a side-by-side here. On the left side is what I just read to you from the Septuagint. I will pour out a spirit of compassion on the house of David, on the inhabitants of Jerusalem, and they shall look to me because they have danced triumphantly. On the right side is the Hebrew, translated here by the Literal Standard Version. It says in verse 10, I have poured on the house of David and on the inhabitant of Jerusalem the spirit of grace and supplications, and they have looked to me whom they have pierced. So where the Septuagint says they were dancing triumphantly, the Hebrew says they pierced me, and now they're looking on me whom they have pierced. And they have mourned over him. The move from me to him, I don't know why that is. I think this is that mysterious me we have seen. They look to me whom they have pierced. So they're dancing. Their arrogance is because they pierced me, and now they're looking at me, and that turns to mourning. Like a mourning over the only one. They have been in bitterness over him, like a bitterness over the firstborn. It's similar, but the Greek here doesn't have the piercing piece. But the Hebrew does. All right. So let's look at just a little bit here. Revelation chapter 1, verse 5. And from Jesus Christ, so he's the one giving this, the faithful witness, the firstborn out of the dead, and the ruler of the kings of the earth, to him loving us and having released us from our sins in his blood, he also made us kings and priests to his God and Father. To him the glory and the power through the ages of the ages. Behold, he comes with the clouds, and every eye will see him, even those who pierced him, and all the tribes of the land will wail because of him. Yes, amen. You see all the verbal links here to Zechariah. Firstborn, every eye piercing him, the tribes of the land will wail because of him. Now this, he comes with the clouds, is from Daniel. So when we get here in Revelation, we'll take a look at those. What I'm persuaded of is, as Jesus is laying this out to John, he is using this terminology from Zechariah to say, that's now. So in Jesus' day, in John's day, what John sees as this revelation is given to him, Jesus is the one whom they pierced, and there's going to be mourning, wailing for the tribes, because the siege of Jerusalem is coming, and some of them are going to be destroyed, and some of them are going to switch from their dancing in triumph to mourning and wailing because they realize what has happened, and they're in poverty. They thought they had a field full of pomegranates, and it's all been destroyed, and they're going to start seeing what they have done to him, or to me, so to speak. Tracking with that? Mourning says, why such a big difference? You're talking about from the Hebrew and the Greek? I don't know. I mean, we see that all over the place. When the New Testament quotes the Septuagint, so often you go back and look at the Hebrew of the same passage, and it's very, very different. Yeah, I don't know. Rob says, wailing may introduce the dancing theme. Interesting. Can you give us a little more on that? William David Buck says, Zechariah 12 is Revelation 1. Wow. Yep. Rob says, Revelation 1:7 seems to take both ideas. Which ideas are you speaking of? All right. So, and please do answer. What are you seeing in the connection? I realize we're not studying Revelation, and there's a temptation here to dig into Revelation, which I don't want to do yet. But do you see those verbal references to Zechariah? And again, I'm making the case, and I will make the case, Zechariah is fulfilled in the first century. And the destruction, and maybe William Dean, this is what you're asking here, the fall of Jerusalem is much of the content of Zechariah 12 through 14. I believe it is also the content of Revelation, which would mean it had to be written before the fall of Jerusalem, because much of what John sees is the coming fall of Jerusalem for him. Rob says, wailing may speak of singing and shouting for joy. Is that true? Is that in the scripture somewhere? I'm not sure I've ever. Do people wail for joy? If you have a scriptural reference for that, I'd love to see it. I don't know that I've seen that. Is the dating revealed in Zechariah specifically because of the verse about the siege? Yes, and yeah, and what we'll continue to see through the rest of Zechariah, it's all the judgment on the shepherds, all the things we have been seeing. So all of that, I believe, is first century. Does that make sense? David says, see it and agree. I was already in this camp for dating Revelation. This helps more. It's a true paradigm shift. Yeah, just don't lock into the idea that the only thing Revelation sees is the fall of Jerusalem. As we go through it, I'll try to show you. I think the vision is broader in the first century. It goes beyond 70 AD. Now, again, I don't think it's all through church history, but it's all through the first century or so. Just read it in the LSV. Read Revelation in the LSV and read it, in just a few sittings, so that you don't get too bogged down in every detail. And consider through 70 AD into the rest of the first and maybe even in the second century, and see if some things don't shift in your thinking. Alexander says, is there a reason why the family house of Levi, Nathan, David are specifically mentioned? Probably there is. I don't know what it is exactly. Yeah, obviously the Levites were the priests. David and Nathan, yeah, I don't know. That's a good question. I don't know. All right, one more thing and then we'll call it a day. Man, these days just keep going so quickly, it seems. All right, back in Zechariah. So I read to you verse 10 that has the looking on those whom they pierced and so on. Let's look at verse 11. On the left here, on the day the mourning in Jerusalem will be great, like the mourning for a pomegranate orchard cut down in the plain. Look at what the Hebrew has. In that day, great is the mourning of Jerusalem as the mourning of Hadradrimmon in the valley of Megiddo. Do you know what English word comes from the word Megiddo? The valley of Megiddo, that is this English word that is so common among the dispensationalists and those who are constantly telling us we're in the end times, yada, yada. What word comes from Megiddo? Anyone? Anyone? Yep, Armageddon. Very good. Guess where that shows up again? In Revelation. And I saw come out of the mouth of the dragon, out of the mouth of the beast, out of the mouth of the false prophet, 3 unclean spirits like frogs, for they are spirits of demons, doing signs which go forth to the kings of the earth and the whole world, to bring them together to the battle of the great day of God the Almighty. Behold, I come as a thief. That's going to be important when we look at this. Verse 16, and they brought them together to the place that is in Hebrew called Armageddon. So, see, yeah, EJ is right. Ezekiel 38 and 39 talk about this too, which you probably figured out already. I'm convinced took place in the first century. I don't think we're waiting for Armageddon. It happened. And it was about the Jews in the first century. All right. Well, with that as a teaser and probably inflammatory for some of you, I'm gonna call it a day. I would encourage you, go back and read through Ezekiel 12 there and try not to get too caught up in every specific detail, but just get settled in your mind those directions, those broad picture ideas that we talked about. Maybe watch this video. If you get confused, watch this video again and just capture some of Jerusalem is going to be destroyed, some of Jerusalem is going to be protected, and they're going to rejoice and be triumphant until they realize what happened, and then they're going to weep and wail and that kind of thing. Just get that clear in your mind. And then if you happen to be reading Josephus, never mind. Well, I mean, it's a good thing to do, but I'm not going to make that statement. All right. Anyway, get familiar with it. We'll see more of the same. Maybe read ahead in Zechariah 13 and 14 and see some of these themes repeat and see if it helps you formulate some ideas. All right, cool. I appreciate all the encouraging words there. I'm glad this is helpform to you. Tomorrow is Freeform Friday. Next Monday, we'll come back and continue in Zechariah. Have a great day, everyone. Grace and peace to you.